Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for joining me. I've enjoyed sitting here and reading all your comments. And of course, we have Mr. Tom Sykes in the building. Tom, blame and panic at the palace. There's been quite a few stories that are just gobsmacking over the last few days. I wanted to pick your brain about the two cottages for one palace story, but from the angle of the furious briefing war that is unfolding.
Yeah, it's been a wild, Shauna. So, what the breaking news today is that everybody basically is running away as fast as they can from any association with this absolutely bonkers idea that the great solution to solve the whole toxic Prince Andrew problem and the massive public opposition to Andrew and the massive anger in the nation about Andrew, somebody brilliantly decided that the solution was to give him two houses, that he could trade out his one house for two houses, Adelaide Cottage and Frogmore Cottage. You know, both pretty freighted properties. Frogmore Cottage was the property of Harry and Meghan. Lovely cottage means, I have to say, a slightly different thing to the royals than it does to you or me. Frogmore Cottage is a 5-bedroom home with underfloor heating. It used to be two cottages that were knocked together in the palatial grounds of Frogmore House. Adelaide Cottage, where William and Kate are currently living and hoping to move out of very shortly, I believe has 4 bedrooms, a lovely reception room, a hall. It's really like a little farmhouse, or a little manor house, or something like that.
Yeah.
So this wild proposal was proposed that started being floated on Sunday, Monday, that Andrew would move out of Royal Lodge if he was given Frogmore Cottage and Sarah Ferguson was given Adelaide Cottage. Well, as you can imagine, this was met with howls of outrage. And then, interestingly, the Ferguson Andrew camp started briefing that this was all King Charles's idea, which I find absolutely fascinating, very compelling, and very convincing, because throughout this whole sorry saga, Charles has shown a magnificent ability to get it wrong at every turn of the road. Every opportunity to take a turning, Charles has managed to take the wrong choice. And of course, to Charles, who has so many houses, I imagine it didn't seem like a very big deal to be like, oh yeah, you can have that house, your ex-wife can have that house. Well, of course, it went down like a lead balloon with the British people. And the media, people absolutely astonished at the idea that a woman who last worked for the royal family in 1987 and has been relentlessly milking them ever since, relentlessly milking her title on books, on movies, on QVC deals for selling, famously for selling juices, the idea that she should be given a wonderful property in the Crown estate just absolutely, obviously, went down terribly. But then what was so interesting was that last night a very interesting story broke, saying that actually the palace were now denying that it was their idea. So this is often what happens. Success has many fathers. Failure tends to have absolutely none. And everyone's running as fast as they can from this ridiculous idea, which does now appear to be dead in the water.
I did have a few thoughts about it, and say it's true, say it was King Charles's idea. I thought there's a few aspects to this. One could be that they're trying to separate Andrew and Sarah once and for all, because I think it's fairly well known that the family have always wanted Andrew to have an independent life away from Sarah Ferguson. I think they'd be quite quick to blame her as a bad influence about the fact that she supposedly introduced him to Epstein in the first place. Also, I'm thinking, could they be trying to separate them because they know that the heat may fall on Sarah more than Andrew at a future date? And the final thing I want to say is, wouldn't it have made more sense to, if they're going to give them anything, to give at least Andrew something on a private estate like Sandringham, like Wood Farm, something that isn't Crown Estate that's going to be, scrutinised for peppercorn rents and all that sort of thing?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that I completely agree about the not being on the Crown Estate. I think it's madness to put him on the Crown Estate. I think it's madness for him to be in Windsor. And again, in the unfathomability of this whole thing is what's so extraordinary and confusing about it. In life, people tend to be to do inexplicable and strange things, but when it's a narrative, which the royal family under Queen Elizabeth very much understood, that their lives and their exploits were seen as a narrative. Queen Elizabeth and her team were always very clear to make sure that there was a fathomable narrative behind it all, that we could all understand what was going on and why it was happening, and it was very clearly signposted where everything was. At the moment, we're in a world of complete chaos. Nobody seems to know what's going on. The palace do keep saying that Frogmore Cottage is where he's going to end up. Well, the palace don't, but sources around Charles are telling me that Frogmore Cottage is where he's going to end up. Frogmore Cottage has been named consistently in the media over the last 3 years that Charles has been running this half on, half off, half hot, half cold campaign to get Andrew out of Royal Lodge. I actually don't know if they do want to get rid of Sarah. I would disagree with you there. I think that Sarah is seen and was definitely understood by the Queen as being the one stabilizing influence, stopping Andrew going completely off the rails. So I think there is actually, I think part of the whole thing with the two houses is that I think there is an awareness that Sarah actually does need, in some shape or form, to be considered. Whether that is now, I don't think that is going to extend to her getting her own house. I mean, I think if Andrew wants to share his house with her, I think that's his business. But I don't see a world in which anyone is now going to sign off on Sarah being given her own house. But I think kind of more interestingly, the pushback from the York camp suggests that really has anything actually changed. I don't know if it really has changed on the ground, because Andrew still has his lease, right? And this is the problem that Charles keeps running into, and he keeps trying to deny doesn't exist. And Andrew just keeps saying, I have my lease. And I did a few back of the envelope maths, and I reckon that Andrew and his heirs are basically in line for about 50 million quid's worth of free accommodation over the next 50 years. Even if I'm wrong by a factor of 50%, right? Even if it's only 25 million, it's still a lot to walk away from just because people are saying that you're a scumball and they hate you. Well, they're not going to stop saying you're a scumball and they hate you if you move to another house, are they? I mean, they're still.
No.
Where does
Especially
it
not at
end?
Windsor.
Where does it end?
Yeah, especially not at Windsor. I mean, that's crazy, because that's just going to still have him riding his horses at Windsor, and he's still going to get, papped occasionally on a long lens, and it's just, and driving out the gates, and, it's just, he's there. And he needs to be further away, I think, very definitely. I did a little poll. Would you say that 8,000 respondents is a fairly decent-sized sample for a poll?
Well, whenever I read stories in the newspaper that are on the front page of the Sunday Times, they say they have 2,000 people. So I think the fact that 8,000 people respond to the Vintage Read show is absolutely brilliant. And
it's a really bad poll, because I don't know how to poll properly, but I did notice that 74% said a definite no, that they should not be granted two houses for giving up Royal Lodge. But I wasn't specific enough. Then I said only Andrew should get a house. Only 7% could even be bothered trying to fathom what point I was trying to make with my poll. I don't think I'll take up polling as my future career. But that no is pretty significant, isn't it? Yeah. That no.
Yeah, I
is
think you should take up polling, because I think that's the thing. They've been given a whole variety of options,
too
but
many.
74% of them have just said no.
No.
And,
Yeah.
you know, sometimes, as they say, no is a complete sentence. And
Yeah, and this was interesting comments underneath. Fergie is Andrew's problem, not the UK taxpayers, which is pretty much what you've been saying. These are representative of a lot of comments. Why is Fergie in the picture? They've been divorced longer than they were married. So this was all these sort of comments underneath the poll, and it's very much what you were saying. You've got your finger on the pulse as far as public sentiment goes about this. One other thing I did wonder, just before I go on to something else I want to discuss with you, is do you think it's the staff at Royal Lodge? I mean, it's fully staffed, isn't it? It's very Downton. It's got the butler and it's got the housemaids and it's got the chef and it's got the whole bit. Whereas Frogmore Cottage is not going to. I mean, they're just going to have food delivery and maybe a daily cleaning lady, but that'd be pretty much it. A butler wouldn't fit in, would he, into Frogmore Cottage?
no, a butler would not fit into Frogmore Cottage. Certainly the running costs are a lot less, but I definitely feel that this whole thing about the running costs is a complete red herring, because of the fact is that Andrew has plenty of money, right?
Yeah.
He's been doing all these dodgy deals for decades. He's got tons of money. He's got friends with tons of money in the Middle East, in the UK, all over the world. The idea that Andrew is going to give up the most amazing house in the whole of the United Kingdom because he can't afford to get the grass cut is complete nonsense. You know, anybody these days can just buy themselves an electric lawnmower. Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's a complete red herring, this thing of like, is he maintaining it? Also, by the way, you know, there are always these photographs produced of this same gatehouse with slightly peeling paint on one side of it. Well, I mean, I'm sure there is a gatehouse with peeling paint in it, but whenever I've looked at photographs of Royal Lodge, and there was some video the other day of it, it looked absolutely magnificent. There was not a pin out of place. And I think Andrew's been very careful to look after the place, because if it was visibly falling down, that would clearly be a violation of the lease. But as far as I can tell, nobody said that he's not looking after the place. So, you know, and also, if he wasn't looking after the place, is Charles prepared to let a historic jewel in the crown of the royal property portfolio fall into disrepair? I mean, is he going to take him to court and evict him? I mean, do you know what I mean? It gets very messy. So what I've always said about this whole thing is that Andrew likes to think of himself as a businessman, and he is not going to leave without an adequate payoff. And Charles is going to have to pay him out of his own pocket. And that's the end of it. He's not going to leave without the money.
That's what I was going to ask you. Do you think that King Charles is a bit tight with his money? Because I'm looking at all this and I'm thinking, you know, if I had that amount of resource available to me and I had problematic family members, I would throw money at it. I would just throw money at the problem, because you would think that even Harry and Meghan, with the right amount, and, you know, Andrew and Sarah, would definitely, if they were promised enough, and that it would be in the form of an annual pension, and a sizable one, and, you know, access to beautiful islands for holidays, and, you know, a friend of Charles's yacht every winter or whatever. If they put a package together, all of this would just go away. I'm not suggesting Andrew deserves that now, but I'm just saying back in the day, if there had been more generosity, would there be so many rogues out grasping for what they could get?
So I think I think that Andrew seems to have been genetically kind of predisposed or psychologically predisposed to want more and to want more money. And so I don't think, and to be fair, the royal family were actually very generous to him. He received a substantial allowance. He received a lovely house. You know, a lot of his running costs were met. He gets his meals couriered down in a liveried van from the Windsor Castle kitchens. He's been allowed to have his wife living there. They've used all of the extra money that they've made to buy property all over the world. So Andrew's never been short of a few bob, to be totally honest. But I think that I think that fundamentally they've got themselves into a very difficult situation with Andrew. But the trouble to me seems to be that now this is metastasizing into a huge, almost existential crisis for the royal family. The property is a very useful pin to draw the fire at the moment, perhaps, and perhaps people are being slightly encouraged to focus on the property, because it stops us, I think, in a way, thinking about what's really going on here with the Epstein files, the corruption, and ultimately the incredibly tragic suicide of Virginia Giuffre, who was trafficked by Epstein to Prince Andrew, she alleges. Now, of course, journalistic probity forces us to mention that Prince Andrew denies ever having met her and denies all the allegations against him. But I think he's been proven such a liar now that I don't think anybody takes those denials seriously. And I think that the problem, in a way, is that when they get rid of him when they get him out of Royal Lodge, when the Democratic Oversight Committee, the Democrats on the Oversight Committee in the United States start to dig into this, what happens if they call him to testify in front of a committee in the United States? Is the United Kingdom going to tell its biggest ally in the whole world that they're not sending somebody to testify on the most important criminal trial of the century? I mean, it's either way. If he goes, it's a disaster. If he doesn't go, it looks terrible. And ultimately, Royal Lodge is a problem right now, but it's basically a problem because King Charles has spent the last 3 years briefing the newspapers that Andrew has to leave and that it's an outrage that he's there. Well, I'm sorry, but I think that if Charles had not spent the last 3 years doing that, I don't think anyone would be particularly aware of Royal Lodge. Even I, as a royal reporter, I wasn't particularly aware of it. I didn't really know what it looked like. I knew it was a big house. I knew people who'd been there who said it was a lovely place and all of that. But I'm afraid, once again, it's Charles who has completely mismanaged not only the policy, but also the optics and the PR of it. And he's the one who's got everybody so worked up about Royal Lodge. And what a stupid thing to get people worked up about when you don't have the power to kick the guy out. I mean, read the lease first. Read the lease. There is no power to kick him out, and they're going to have to pay him off.
Yeah, I think that is a fantastic point, because as you were sort of laying all that out, and I was really just playing devil's advocate when I was saying throw more money at Andrew because I wanted to see what you would say. But you made such a great point, and you laid out the case for the fact that it is a major distraction. So that was the point. That was the point, a major distraction, because when everyone's looking at that, they're not looking at under the radar financial deals, are they? They're not delving into everything else that the palace don't want you to look at. I wanted to get on to something really important related to the briefing wars. Now, I loved your article that you wrote about the fact that, sources from the palace, said that appalling quote about the Queen, about her leaving an unexploded bomb for Charles in the way she dealt with Andrew. And you did a really passionate piece defending the late Queen, and I thought it was wonderful. And I just want to provide some timeline for people quickly. Andrew Loney made us aware that the Queen did bury her head in the sand, did look the other way, was more of a mother than a monarch during that 2001-2011 Special Representative Trade period. But you make a valid point that from 2017, when Andrew and Charles got rid of Christopher Gite, then it's on them. And they have no right to make it about the Queen past that point. I'll hand over to you because you really made some great points in that article.
Yeah, I mean, this has definitely been in the ether, right? This has definitely been like seeding out like fungal spores from comments and social media that did the Queen know more? What did the Queen know did the Queen not do enough to stop Andrew? So that's been a bit of a theme that's been building, and I think it's absolutely historical. It's a matter of public record that the Queen did turn a blind eye, that she was indulgent towards Andrew, and that, even after he had been had the settlement with Jouffre, and that he had his titles withdrawn and this and that, she did allow him to walk her into her memorial service for her husband on her arm. But do you remember when the Queen walked into that memorial service on Andrew's arm? Do you remember the gasps that greeted it? People were really shocked, and the palace was very, very quick to get a message out there saying, do you know what? This is a woman who lost her husband. She wasn't able to have a proper funeral for her husband. She had to sit on her own in that absolutely tragic photograph of the Queen sitting on her own at St. George's Chapel with a black face mask on for her husband's funeral. And yes, Andrew is out of the picture. We've seen him today, but we're not going to be seeing a great deal more of him, if any of him ever again. And the last Christmas that the Queen was alive, which is 2021, Andrew was not allowed to go to church at Sandringham. And ultimately, when the Queen died in 2022, I believe that the settlement she bequeathed Charles around Andrew was practical. It seemed to be working, it seemed to be holding, and it seemed to be tolerated by the public, which was, you're never going to see him again, right? Basically, that was it. And immediately, Charles started undoing it. Andrew was given a major ceremonial role at the funeral. Now, I'm not saying he shouldn't be allowed to pay tribute to his mother, but it's different. It's like she's the CEO of a company, of an institution. It's different, to give this man who presumably Charles knew everything about, because he was involved in the payoff to Jouffre. He oversaw it and rubber stamped it. It was crazy. Why was she beware? And then there was all this dispute about, whether Harry could come, whether Andrew could come, all of this kind of stuff. And, whatever you may think of Harry and his treachery to the royal family, which I absolutely believe that he was completely wrong to write that book, he actually hasn't been accused of sex crimes. Do you know what I mean? As he himself says in his book. So I think that the bringing of Andrew back in began on day one. And it's Charles, the Queen, put a lot of distance between the royal family and Andrew, and Charles decreased that distance. He had them for so many different events, which, I mean, we can list and we can go through, but everybody knows what they were. They were Christmas, they were Easter, they were the Knights of the Garter, they were this, they were that, they were Fergie at Buckingham Palace, they were, and to invite Sarah Ferguson to join the family for the Christmas Day walk, the most important photograph in the United Kingdom's national consciousness, maybe not quite, maybe the second most, maybe the most important is the balcony photograph at the Trooping the Colour. But this walk to church, I would say, is well up there in the top three photo calls of the year. What on earth was she doing there? Charles knew all about it. They knew all of this stuff in Andrew Loney's book, and that's why they didn't want Andrew testifying or being deposed, because they knew what would come up. Why on earth was she there? And for Charles's team to have the gall to blame his disastrous decision-making on Queen Elizabeth is the most ridiculous and ill-advised form of gaslighting. Because do you know what, Shauna? We all know what we saw. We know what we saw. We saw a very, very dutiful monarch who served for 70 years and with absolute dignity and very, very rarely put a foot wrong. And we've seen what it's been replaced with, an absolutely chaotic administration where everything that can be done wrong is being done wrong. And this is where it's ended up. It's ended up in this complete mess of Prince Andrew, Royal Lodge, sitting in Royal Lodge, while the heir to the throne is in a little cottage outside Windsor Castle. I mean, it's just, the whole thing is completely mad. And I just felt that for him to try and weaponize Queen Elizabeth II's legacy of service, I just felt it was absolutely ridiculous. And I'm very glad to say that it seems to have vanished as quickly as it appeared. There's been nothing further about it.
I was glad to see that too. Also, I wanted to give people your quote because I think it was wonderful. A grotesque slur and unworthy of the office of king. It wasn't very honourable, was it? And I think that's what we're sort of seeing. None of this is very honourable. I want to pick up on you, not in a predictable way, but I have thought very deeply about that statement about as bad as Harry may seem to be, he hasn't committed a sex crime. And that is very, very true. And I was thinking about it. I was thinking, well, then what is my position? Because I have to have a position on this. And I thought, well, I know what it is. It isn't that he did anything, it's what he accused others of. And I think the most awful one was Catherine being a racist in his book. He overwhelmingly implied it. So I don't think it's that he's committed a crime, as far as we know. And it's not that we can't stand the person he chose to marry, which most of us can't stand her. It is purely that awful attack where, and I'll never forget it, when Catherine was attending, I think it was a command performance at that night, and I think she was with the Danish Queen and King, from memory. I might be wrong, or maybe it was the Dutch one. Sorry if I've got that wrong, guys. No, it wasn't Danish. It must have been the Dutch King and Queen. She had that blue dress on. I remember She got out of the car and people were yelling out stuff because it had just broken in Omen Scobie's book, the names about the two, royal races had broken that day. And that was the point where I thought, okay, you're out, because that's just cruelty. I didn't see the point of that. And I don't believe she's racist. So that's my position. I think that was the heinous crime there, but we don't have to get bogged down in it. But you raised a really interesting point, because that is an argument people make. I also was really fascinated with your article because you brought up some humdingers of things. You mentioned about the fact that Catherine and William were made to drive Andrew to church at Balmoral. And we all know that, it was the king that said you have to do that. And I wondered whether that was a re-embracing of Andrew, or was it just pulling William down a peg or two?
No, it was. So that was in, and I'm sure our commenters will correct me if I'm wrong, but that was in January 2024, before Charles had announced that he had cancer. And it was
in the summer of 23.
It was in the summer.
Yeah, it was in the summer of 23. They're all up at Balmoral for the summer. But I mean, it's only 6 months. Right. What's the difference? Of course, but your point stands. It was prior to. Yeah.
It was prior to the cancer diagnosis, right? And because Charles then still had a lot of power in the way that a monarch does have absolute power in the system, And I think it's very important to remember, and I always say this to people, the royal family is essentially a military. Its structure is copied from a military organization. So you have to obey your chain of command, right? And the king is at the top of the chain of command. So what the king says, even if you don't like it, you have to do it, or else you're disobeying orders, which is, has serious consequences. You can kvetch about it afterwards to the media, or you can complain about it, or you can put out your version of events or what have you. But ultimately, you have to follow orders. And William and Catherine were told to drive Andrew to church because Charles knew that by doing that, it would make it look like they supported the rehabilitation of Andrew. So it was a very clever way by Charles of using William's political capital to advance his own pet, mysteriously motivated project of rehabilitating Andrew and bringing Andrew back into the fold. And you can see from William and Catherine's faces that they don't look particularly happy with the situation, but they're doing it.
No.
They told the Mirror the next day that they had been obliged to do it. And of course, all that is relevant to people like you and me, right, who follow up on the story. But for the 99% of people around the world who just see the picture, they see, oh, Prince William and Kate are getting on with Andrew again because they're giving him a lift to church. And that is what Charles wanted to happen. And I think it was an important part of the fracture in the relationship between William and Charles, which has never been brilliant, contrary to, you know, much of what you'll read in sort of mainstream traditional media will tell you that, you know, you couldn't put a cigarette paper between them and all this kind of stuff. It's not true at all. And the relationship has always been difficult. Charles was a very distant father. He had his own preoccupations going on when the boys were young. You know, we saw that scene in Spare where Harry was left on his own in bed for several hours after being told that his mother had died. So I don't think anyone could accuse Charles of being an overly emotional parent. And one of the really interesting things is that it's not just Harry, but William, by omission. Whenever I've never heard William once praise Charles's parenting. The only thing he's ever said once was that he wanted to see more of him in connection with the grandparent, that he fell asleep at the desk and got notes stuck on his head. And it was done quite affectionately. But ultimately, William has never uttered a single word of praise about Charles's parenting. And I think it's very telling. And I think that this drive to church, where they were forced to drive Andrew to church, I think really marked a point where a troublesome moment in their relationship. And then, of course, in 2024, when Charles, in my opinion, very unwisely pre-announced his own death by saying that he had cancer, all of the power since has just drifted to William. And you only have to watch, you know, any Shakespeare play all the way through to Game of Thrones or House of the Dragon, which are all about the death of kings. And all those plays are about how all of history is about how power transfers from one monarch to the other, and how, as the monarch starts to ail, these factions start to form, the courtiers start to brief, the team start to brief, the family members start to jockey for position. And that's why Queen Elizabeth didn't even tell her own family that she had cancer until the very end.
Yeah, it's so true that we forget. See, the trouble with, as this story goes on, we forget what is said at the time, and you probably don't, but I've got to go back and check. And in the newspaper reports after that drive to church happened, it was very much about rehabilitation. This is a representative quote. It's the latest sign that the Duke of York has been welcomed back into the family, but despite stepping back from public duties over his links with convicted pedophile Jeffrey Epstein. The other thing that gobsmacked me, now this is juicy, everyone. I could not believe this, and this was in Tom's piece. I don't think anyone knows this. The King tried to secure an invitation for Andrew to Catherine's Christmas Carol service in 24. That is appalling. And he just got his nose slapped. Go away, no way. But how out of touch and tone deaf would you have to be to think that William or Catherine would agree to that?
Yeah, that was definitely a bridge too far, and I think the Waleses were able to resist that because it was very much Catherine's thing, and of course because it was very much focused around children. And I think they were able to make their office, more to the point, was able to make the case to the King's office that it would be a distraction and it wouldn't be appropriate and it wouldn't be helpful to his mission to, you know, have Andrew, as you put it in that quote, as the sources were saying, welcomed back into the family. And I
Yeah.
think this is the point, Shauna, that everybody is conveniently forgetting, is that the briefing around Andrew when the Queen was alive was he's out. You're not
He's
going to be
out.
seeing him much anymore. Let's not
Yeah.
talk about it. Became this very aggressive, endless briefing that he wasn't part of the working family, but he was part of the blood family, that you couldn't ban a man from being your brother, you couldn't divorce your brother, you couldn't fire someone from the role of your brother, that he had a right to attend church, that Charles was a Christian. I mean, as if making out the Queen wasn't a Christian. I mean, it was like, do you know what I mean? It was just
Yeah.
disgraceful.
Crazy.
And
Yeah.
and there is absolutely no doubt that this whole mess has been caused by Charles's attempts to, as you put it there, welcome Andrew back into the family. If there had not been this ridiculous drive to welcome Andrew back into the family, we wouldn't be where we are today.
Yeah. You had another brilliant quote. I think this is quite amazing, actually, this one. A ruler who cannot bear responsibility, searching for a ghost to blame. When you wrote that, you must have just stopped and walked around the room and thought, yes, I've still got it. You must have been proud of that one. That was a good one. But it does sum it up, doesn't it? It really does. I mean, it's nearly Shakespearean, Tom. That was very well done. But in all seriousness, I think it really gets to the heart of the matter, that and a ghost to blame. This blame game, it really indicates panic, doesn't it? And is it panic on behalf of the courtiers because they know they've done a really bad job? I mean, the proof is in the pudding. Whoever he's surrounded with is not doing a good job. So are they all panicking and sort of running around with their knickers in a knot trying to find something that will work?
The weird thing is, Shauna, they're not panicking. They just keep going. They just keep making out that everything is sort of completely under control and that it'll all blow over. And this has always been royal policy, right? It's always been like, we're just going to keep calm and carry on. Scandals come and scandals go, and this is going to blow over. This one is not blowing over. And I know exactly when this began because weirdly, I started my Substack like literally the day before Andrew Loney's first extracts published in the Daily Mail. And it was on August the 2nd. Well, August, September, October. This has now been the lead story in the United Kingdom for 3 months. It's not blowing it over. It's not going anywhere. And it's also insoluble unless, as that heckler said to Charles outside Lichfield Cathedral the other day, they cut him loose, they let the police investigate him, and they tell us what they knew and when they knew it, and a full and frank accounting of what happened. But I do think that now, ultimately, the only way out of this for the royal family is to completely sacrifice Andrew. All protection must be removed. He must be investigated by the police. I think he needs to face a criminal trial. And I don't see without that this is ever going to go away. Because the question you keep hearing is, well, what's going to be enough? And this is what Andrew's side is saying. What's going to be enough? If we give up Royal Lodge, we'll still be blamed. I'll tell you what will be enough. Accountability like the rest of us. Accountability under the court of law. Proof of the fact that no man is above the law. This is the guy who rams the gates at Windsor Great Park and the police decide there's no case to answer. We know why they decided there was no case to answer, because they didn't want to get involved with the royal family. They didn't want to prosecute a member of the royal family. But ultimately, I think that the only way this is going to end is, I think, under William saying he needs to be prosecuted, or he at least needs to be investigated. He needs to be
Investigated, then prosecuted. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I've got something to show you just to finish up with, and we're getting a lot of this. This was in the Times, and we're sort of being shamed and admonished for keeping the story going, for being interested in it, for isn't it enough? Hasn't he been punished enough? Come on. And this piece basically implied that because he was a royal, he was being picked on. That was the angle they're taking, and sort of shaming people in Britain for having such cold hearts, don't kick a man while he's down. So that's the theme. And I've seen that become a little more prevalent. I've seen quite a few commentary sort of leaning in that direction. And I think what they're missing is what you just said. You just made the main point that because he's royal, he was not investigated. And when there's that vacuum, people will keep kicking him while he's down on the ground, metaphorically, because where there's a vacuum of justice, people will fill in that piece. They will almost become a little bit vigilante-like because they're trying to push for justice where in that gap. And so that would make this go away, I think, if there was an independent investigation, like you said. Then I think things would quieten down because people would be willing to wait for the outcome, as long as the investigation was not a stitch up. And people
Absolutely.
would have to be convinced of that, wouldn't they? Yeah.
So what I'd love to say, just could you show that headline again?
Yeah.
If I was Matthew Paris's editor and he'd sent that in, I would have said, do you know what, Matthew? Let's turn the headline around the other way. Let's say the kicking is getting ugly, but my God, Andrew is a hell of a rat. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that is a very interesting point, because I agree that the psychology of crowds is absolutely fascinating. And the fact that after Andrew wrote his book and the floodgates opened, suddenly, everybody felt it was open season. And there is a sense of obeying for Andrew's blood, which is fascinating just from a sort of psychology of crowds point of view. But let's not forget the central issue here. Andrew's not a rat. Yeah. Andrew is something much worse than a rat. And Andrew is heavily implicated in the death of a young woman in your part of the world named Virginia Giuffre. So this is not a question of somebody being a bit of a rat or a scamp or this or that or Randy Andy or any of these other, minimizing slapstick terms. And yeah, you know what? Matthew Paris is a great writer. He's quite rarefied. He has this slightly pompous tone where he likes to be above the fray and, blah, blah, blah. But the reality is that this is nobody's fault but Prince Andrew's. This is not the fault of the people who've exposed him. This is his fault. This is Andrew's fault. Well, aided and abetted by King Charles, I hasten to add.
Yeah. And Sarah.
Yeah.
As well. Well, thank you so much, Tom. That was really interesting. And I think we sort of got into a bit of nuance there underneath the story. That's why I love you coming on. Thank you to everybody that joined us. I'm going to go off and read all your comments. Sorry we didn't feature you, but when I've got him here, I've just got to make the most of him while I've got him on the stage. And hopefully I'll see you next month, Tom.
Definitely, Shauna. I can't wait.
Okay.
And thank you very much, everybody, for being here.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. We're clicking out now. We'll do our awkward wave, Tom. Here we go. Bye, everyone. Bye.